You won't believe what was behind this girl's innocent smile. What drove her to commit one of the most brutal crimes to shake Europe? Family tragedy, a broken fate, and a terrible obsession. All this led to a bloody denouement, which you will learn about right now. Prepare yourself for the most shocking case in Swedish forensic history. It's a story you'll never forget. Subscribe to True Crime Sketches to find out all the horrifying details. In the realm of psychology, there exists a term known as Adult syndrome. It describes a morbid obsession, one person becoming so consumed by another that they lose control over their emotions. This disturbing affliction takes its name from Adelie Hugo, the youngest daughter of the famous French writer, Victor Hugo. Adelie was not only an extraordinarily beautiful woman, but also a gifted pianist. Yet her life was forever changed by an unrequited love that led to her mental and emotional downfall. Her fixation spiraled out of control, poisoning her own existence, while simultaneously ruining the life of the man she desired. For years, she stalked him, pretending to be his wife, until she ultimately destroyed his career and personal life. Tragically, Adelie would go on to spend 43 of her 84 years in the confines of a psychiatric hospital. This kind of obsessive attachment, where one person becomes so enraptured with another that they lose all sense of self-control, is not as rare as we might think. While many cases can be managed with the help of experienced psychologists, others require hospitalization and more intensive therapy. In extreme circumstances, this kind of obsession can teeter on the edge of insanity, leading individuals down dark paths filled with desperation, unpredictability, and even cruelty. A particularly horrifying example of this occurred in 2008, shaking the whole of Europe. The case of Emma Ljungstig has now taken an important place in the history of Swedish forensic science, becoming one of the most brutal and terrifying episodes. Though it was initially thought the perpetrator might be deemed insane, with insufficient evidence threatening to close the case, everything changed once the truth revealed itself in the courtroom. Emma's story begins innocently enough. Born in Stockholm on February 16, 1985, she grew up in a modest home, the younger of two daughters. Her early years passed in the company of her older sister, Kathina, in a simple yet loving household. At the tender age of 19, Emma married her high school sweetheart, Nicholas. Barely an adult, Emma was already expecting her first child by the time they wed. At 20, Emma became a mother to a son, Max. Just over a year later, she gave birth to their daughter, Saga. But despite these milestones, the couple's youth and inexperience proved too much for the relationship to endure. Their marriage was strained, plagued by constant arguments over trivial matters. Communication broke down, and shortly after the birth of their daughter, the young couple decided to part ways. As often happens, their separation was neither smooth nor amicable. The bitterest point of contention between them was custody of their two young children. Nicholas wanted not just to support the children financially, but to be actively involved in their lives. Emma didn't oppose this at first, but things quickly grew complicated when a new love entered her life. Moving away from Stockholm to the small town of Aruga, 150 kilometers from her hometown, Emma took her children with her to start afresh with her new lover. This, however, infuriated Nicholas. He had envisioned being a daily presence in his children's lives, and Emma's move shattered that dream. Tensions flared between the ex-spouses, leading to several courtroom battles. At one point, Nicholas even issued threats, which Emma immediately reported to the police. Their legal struggles over custody escalated, each parent fighting tooth and nail for sole custody of Max and Saga. It became a battle of wills, and the question of the children's future hung in the balance. Meanwhile, Emma's new relationship flourished. She had met a man named Torny Hellberg online. Despite Emma being only 23 years old and already a mother of two, Torny didn't hesitate to embrace her children, dreaming of building a family together. But as we know, even the best-laid plans can spiral into chaos. Emma's obsession with control and the mounting pressure of unresolved conflicts soon took her down a dark and dangerous path. What started as a seemingly normal, albeit strained family drama would soon unravel into a horrifying, unforgettable tragedy, one that would expose the sinister side of human nature when love turns into a suffocating, toxic obsession. The events that unfolded next would leave a scar on everyone involved, a grim reminder of how fragile the line between love and madness can be. The newly married couple, Emma and Torny, seemed to be settling into an idyllic life together. They first lived in a small house Torny had inherited, a cozy place perfect for starting their family. But as their relationship blossomed and the children grew, they decided to move into a larger home, one where each of the children could have their own space, a warm, welcoming environment for their growing family. Torny, secure in his job with a stable income, provided for them, while Emma, trained as a designer, dedicated herself to raising Max and Saga, though she had plans to eventually return to her career. Their future seemed bright. They had even begun planning a summer wedding in 2008, imagining the perfect day where their love would be celebrated. But fate had other, far darker plans in store. It was the ordinary, unassuming Monday of March 17, 2008. Torny left for work early and Emma, as usual, remained at home with the children, 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. The day passed uneventfully as Emma prepared dinner, waiting for her fiancé to return while chatting with her sister Katerina online. They discussed a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary, a casual conversation that carried a sense of normalcy. Then around 6:30 p.m., Torny called Emma to let her know he would be home late and that she shouldn't wait to start dinner. After their brief exchange, Emma went back to her chores, fed the children, and resumed her conversation with Katerina. But then, at exactly 7:07 p.m., something unsettling happened. Their communication stopped, abruptly, mid-sentence. Katerina, puzzled, saw Emma had been typing but never sent the message. Minutes ticked by, and with each passing moment, a sense of dread settled over Katerina. She called her sister's phone, no answer. Growing more worried, she contacted Torny, who assured her everything was probably fine. He was just arriving home and told her not to worry, assuming Emma was simply caught up with the kids. But as Torny stepped through the front door, a strange unease crept over him. The door was unlocked, an unusual occurrence. As he entered, expecting to be greeted by the sounds of his children playing, he instead found chaos. The house was in disarray, as if some wild energy had torn through it. At first, he thought Max and Saga had simply made a mess, but then his eyes caught sight of something far more disturbing. On the floor, brown stains spread in strange patterns. His breath hitched in his throat as the reality of what he was seeing hit him. Blood. Panic surged as he called out their names. Emma, Max, Saga. But the silence that answered him was deafening. And then he saw it. Lying on the floor in a grotesquely unnatural position was Saga. For a fleeting moment, Torny's mind tried to rationalize the horror, convincing himself it was just a doll. How could it be anything else? But as he approached, the horrifying truth became clear. It was his daughter, her tiny body soaked in blood, her face unrecognizable, battered beyond comprehension. He turned, barely able to process the nightmare unfolding before him. Max was nearby, his small form equally lifeless, his skull fractured, blood pooling beneath him. Emma, his beloved Emma, lay just feet away, her body twisted, her face mangled and shattered as if she had been struck repeatedly with monstrous force. The once vibrant home had been transformed into a slaughterhouse of devastation. Torny's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, his mind a blur of panic and disbelief. He dialed the emergency number, barely able to form the words to describe what he had found. As he spoke, a sudden guttural sound filled the room, a long, drawn-out groan. It was Emma. Against all odds, she was still alive, though barely. Within moments, police and paramedics arrived, rushing to the scene to find an unimaginable horror. The house was soaked in blood, the children's bodies brutally beaten, and Emma clinging to life by a thread. The sheer brutality of the attack left everyone stunned. Who or what could have done this? The priority, though, was clear. Save their lives, if there was still any hope left. The paramedics worked feverishly, administering life-saving measures as Emma and the children were rushed to the hospital. But the nightmare was far from over. As they fought to keep the victims alive, detectives began piecing together the harrowing puzzle, trying to understand who had committed this heinous act. The investigation had just begun, but the chilling reality was setting in. Something monstrous had visited this peaceful home, leaving a trail of blood, broken dreams, and shattered lives in its wake. The paramedics who first arrived at the scene harbored deep doubts about whether they could even get the victims to the hospital alive. Yet, against all odds, Emma, Max, and Saga were still clinging to life when they arrived at the emergency room. The prognosis, however, was grim. All three had suffered catastrophic head injuries, severe brain trauma, and extensive blood loss. The doctors, though giving no promises, worked tirelessly to save them. Max and Saga, the innocent children caught in this unimaginable nightmare, were in the most critical condition. Even if by some miracle their lives were saved, it was unlikely they would ever regain the ability to breathe on their own. Their tiny bodies had been battered beyond repair. Emma, though in a dire state, was at least deemed stable enough to be placed into a medically induced coma. Hooked up to life support machines, Her body was left to fight for survival, with the faint hope that she might pull through. While doctors wrestled with the delicate balance between life and death, forensic investigators descended on the house, picking through the remnants of a scene that was nothing short of chaos. Blood splattered the walls and floors, belongings strewn haphazardly around the house. The intrusion of paramedics, while necessary to save lives, left behind a trail of confusion. Footprints trampled over the bloodied floors, and items had been shifted in the haste to reach the victims. The challenge now lay in distinguishing which of these prints belonged to the rescuers, and whether any trace of the attacker remained. Despite the scene's devastation, the investigators began piecing together a timeline. Emma's last communication with her sister had been at exactly 7:07 p.m. Torney's frantic call to the police came just 13 minutes later at 7:20 p.m. Within that narrow window, a brutal massacre had unfolded. The sheer violence of the attack suggested an intensely personal motive. Whoever had done this didn't just want to kill, they wanted to obliterate. The murder weapon, it was surmised, was a blunt and heavy object, most likely a hammer. Yet no such object was found in the house, leading investigators to conclude that the perpetrator had taken it with them when they fled the scene. This only deepened the mystery, and attention quickly turned to the obvious first suspect, Torney Helberg. From the outset, suspicion naturally fell on Helberg. He wasn't married to Emma, nor was he the father of her children, which led investigators to consider whether a domestic quarrel had spiraled into a nightmarish bloodbath. In the face of such immense grief, Torney was immediately brought in for questioning, yet his alibi was airtight. He had been at work later than usual that evening, a fact corroborated by his boss and several colleagues. Furthermore, security cameras along the streets had captured him walking home at the exact time his family was being slaughtered. Despite being cleared of suspicion, Torney was asked for a detailed account of his day, hoping he might recall something that could aid in the investigation. But nothing unusual stood out. Everything had seemed normal, until of course, he walked through the door and saw the nightmare that awaited him. The only odd detail he could remember was that the front door had been left unlocked, suggesting that Emma had willingly let the intruder in. After his statement, Torney was released, shattered and broken, as he went to inform Emma's family of the unspeakable tragedy. Emma's parents were already on their way from Stockholm to Aruga when they heard the news. As they sped toward the hospital, clinging to the hope that their daughter and grandchildren would somehow survive, the radio broadcast brought them the unthinkable. Max and Saga had died from their injuries, never regaining consciousness. The loss was unfathomable. Their bright young lives had been extinguished, and all that remained were questions. With Torney cleared, the focus shifted to another likely suspect, Emma's ex-husband and the father of her children, Nicholas. The couple's divorce had been anything but peaceful. Despite over a year passing since their separation, they had continued to quarrel, mostly over the custody of Max and Saga. The tension between them had escalated so severely that Nicholas had even threatened Emma, a fact she had reported to the police at the time. Nicholas had long been embittered by their disputes, particularly over Emma's decision to move to Aruga with the children and her new partner. The custody battles had been fierce, with neither side willing to relent. Could this have pushed Nicholas over the edge? Did his anger and frustration finally boil over into a frenzied act of revenge? As detectives dug deeper into the life of Nicholas, more disturbing details began to surface. Friends and family recounted how his temper had worsened in the months leading up to the attack. His threats, once dismissed as the angry words of a frustrated father, now took on a much darker tone in the wake of the tragedy. But while suspicion hung heavily over Nicholas, the investigation was far from over. More pieces of the puzzle needed to fall into place. The investigators knew that finding the missing weapon and confirming Nicholas's whereabouts during those critical minutes would be key to solving the mystery of who had committed such a heinous act against Emma and her children. And so, the investigation pressed on, haunted by the weight of lives lost too soon, and the search for justice for the innocent souls whose futures had been stolen in the blink of an eye. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. After all, Nicholas had every reason to harbor a deep resentment toward Emma. She had taken the children and moved to a new city, building a life with someone else. After losing custody, Nicholas could have reached a breaking point, snapping under the weight of his frustration and grief, driven to commit the unthinkable. The investigators, fueled by this narrative, quickly tracked him down and took him into custody. Upon hearing the news of Max and Saga's deaths, Nicholas was utterly devastated. He sobbed uncontrollably, repeatedly asking if there had been some terrible mistake. When the charges were presented to him, accusing him of the brutal murders of his children and ex-wife. Nicholas was first stunned into silence and then exploded into a fit of rage, shouting that he could never harm his beloved children. They had been the world to him, he claimed, and though his relationship with Emma was fractured, he had no desire to hurt her either. When questioned about his whereabouts at the time of the crime, Nicholas explained that he had been out of town on business, about 120 miles away. Initially, this claim seemed weak, but soon his alibi was verified. Witnesses confirmed that Nicholas had indeed been far from the scene of the crime when the massacre took place. The investigators were back to square one, their prime suspect cleared. With Nicholas ruled out, the search for clues intensified. Forensic investigators worked tirelessly at the house, though the scene was difficult to analyze. The attacker had been careful, wearing gloves and leaving no fingerprints behind. The real challenge came with the footprints. A dozen medical personnel had been in and out of the house, attempting to save the victims, and now investigators had to sift through all the prints to determine which ones didn't belong to the paramedics, Torney, or the victims themselves. An additional layer of fear hung over the investigation. The thought that the perpetrator, upon discovering that Emma had survived, might return to the hospital to finish what they had started. Emma was the only potential witness, and if she regained consciousness, she might be able to identify the attacker. With this in mind, law enforcement placed a 24-hour guard outside her hospital room, determined to protect her from any further harm. At the same time, detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing anyone who might have seen something unusual. A breakthrough came when one neighbor recalled seeing a suspicious figure dressed in black clothing around 5 p.m. Emma and Torney's house. The person was cloaked in a hood, making it impossible to see their face, but the neighbor mentioned that the figure was short and fragile, which led her to think it might have been a woman. This was a curious lead, but without more information, it remained an open question. A stroke of luck came when investigators reviewed footage from a street surveillance camera near a store just a few minutes from the crime scene. In the video, they saw a similar figure, dressed in black with a hood concealing their face. The person's stature and build suggested they were indeed a small, frail individual. But who could this be? And what reason would they have to want Emma and her children dead? The footage was shown to Torney, hoping he might recognize something about the mysterious figure. From the very first frames, Torney's expression changed. His face drained of color as recognition dawned on him. Hesitant at first, he finally admitted that the person in the video could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Schurer. Although he couldn't be certain, the resemblance was too strong to ignore. Christina Schurer, born in Hanover, Germany in 1977, had a complex and troubled history. Her father had abandoned the family when she was just a child, leaving her with deep emotional scars that would haunt her throughout her life. Though she was intelligent and determined, her childhood trauma had shaped her into a willful and difficult person. As a teenager, Christina moved to New York as part of an exchange program and lived there for several years, where she thrived academically. She earned a degree in history and archaeology and spent much of her young adult life traveling across Europe, participating in archaeological digs and historical expeditions. Her intellectual pursuits, however, masked a darker side, one that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Christina's relationship with Torney had been intense but tumultuous, and after their breakup she had struggled to let go. Though outwardly successful, her emotional instability often manifested in obsessive tendencies. Could her past relationship with Torney and the sight of him moving on with Emma have triggered a violent jealousy? Was Christina capable of such brutality? The investigators now had a new direction to follow. They would need to delve deeper into Christina's life, her relationship with Torney, and what might have driven her to commit such a monstrous act. The quiet, bookish archaeologist now appeared to be at the center of a blood-soaked mystery, her motivations hidden beneath layers of history and heartbreak. In the summer of 2006, Christina Schurer's journey took her to the sun-soaked island of Crete, Greece, where she worked as a tour guide at one of the island's popular hotels. It was there in July that she crossed paths with 26-year-old Torney Hellberg, a Swedish man on vacation. Christina was instantly drawn to him. His relaxed demeanor and youthful charm caught her attention. The attraction was mutual. Torney found Christina to be intelligent, well-educated, and fascinating. Before long, the two were entangled in a brief but intense summer romance. Though Christina was 29, a few years older than Torney, the age difference didn't matter at the time. Their connection burned hot but fast, lasting only a week while Torney was on vacation. Once he returned to Sweden, they continued to stay in touch, exchanging phone calls and messages over the internet. A few months later, Christina took it upon herself to visit him in Sweden, showing up at his doorstep uninvited and asking to stay at his house. Torny was taken aback by her boldness. He found her behavior overly forward, even invasive, and it left him feeling uncomfortable. When Christina proposed a weekend getaway in the mountains, Torny declined, hoping that this would mark the end of their involvement. Yet Christina was persistent. She continued to call him, sending messages and proposing new plans, refusing to accept that their brief relationship had run its course. By January 2007, Torny had had enough. During a phone conversation, he told Christina explicitly that their relationship was over and that they should stop seeing each other. However, she refused to acknowledge his words, as if the rejection didn't register. She kept calling, insisting on meeting him again, and even suggested they go on vacation together as if nothing had changed. In the spring of 2007, Christina returned to Sweden, this time in full stalker mode. She began following Torny, showing up unannounced and pleading with him to rekindle their romance. When he explained that he was now in a new relationship, she attempted to manipulate the situation. Claiming she had forgotten something at his house during her last visit, she begged him to let her come by to retrieve it. Reluctantly, Torny agreed, but as soon as they were inside, Christina made a bold move to seduce him. When he firmly rejected her, she warned him, in a chilling tone, that he would regret it. 3 months later, Christina reappeared, this time with a different tactic. She apologized profusely for her earlier behavior, claiming she had acted irrationally and asking for another chance. Torny remained unmoved, still adamant that their relationship was over. That evening, however, his phone rang. On the other end, a tearful Christina told him that she had swallowed a large number of pills and that she couldn't bear the thought of living without him. In a panic, Torny immediately called an ambulance and also contacted Christina's family, urging them to take her mental health seriously. Christina was taken to the hospital where she received emergency care. Her mother, realizing the severity of the situation, had her admitted to a psychiatric facility. Christina spent more than a month undergoing treatment, but even after her release, it was clear that the therapy had done little to address her underlying obsession with Torny. Her fixation only grew stronger. She became consumed by thoughts of him, concocting endless schemes to get him back into her life. Despite her psychiatric treatment, Christina remained a prisoner of her obsession, her mind unable to let go of the fantasy that Torny would one day return to her. In October 2007, Christina escalated her efforts. She relocated to Sweden, renting an apartment in the suburbs of Stockholm with another woman. There, she resumed her pursuit of Torny, continuing to stalk him. On one of their forced meetings, Christina made a shocking revelation. She claimed that she had given birth to Torny's child, a son whom she had since given up for adoption. Torny was stunned, not knowing what to believe. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the timeline. The last time they had been intimate was over a year ago, and he had seen Christina several times since then. She had never shown any signs of pregnancy during those encounters, yet Christina's story kept shifting, each time adding new and confusing details. She was evasive when asked directly about the alleged child, leaving Torny even more uncertain about the truth. By January 2008, Christina had taken her manipulation to another level. After numerous failed attempts to arrange a meeting, she sent Torny a message claiming that their son had been diagnosed with a hereditary disease. According to Christina, they needed to travel to Germany together to see the boy. She added that the adoptive father would soon be in touch to give Torny more information. This series of strange, erratic behaviors only deepened the suspicion that Christina was not well. Her obsession with Torny had reached a dangerous peak, and she appeared willing to go to any lengths to remain entangled in his life, no matter the cost. At the same time that Torny and Emma were settling into their new home, Emma was well aware of the saga surrounding Torny's ex-girlfriend, Christina. She believed that Christina's story about having a son was just a desperate attempt to lure Torny to Germany, fabricating the entire tale to manipulate him. When Torny finally received a call from a man claiming to be the adoptive father of their child, Emma advised him to press for details no true parent could avoid. Torny asked pointed questions about the boy's birth, which hospital he was born in, and other specifics. The man on the other end of the line grew increasingly agitated, avoiding the questions before abruptly hanging up. It was the final straw for Torny. He was convinced now more than ever that no child existed. Christina had fabricated the entire story, likely involving one of her acquaintances to play along in her web of deceit. Detectives, having uncovered this convoluted story, wasted no time in locating Christina. They discovered where she lived and immediately went to the address. Her roommate opened the door, explaining that Christina had hastily packed up her belongings the day before, telling her that she was returning to Germany. A background check confirmed that Christina had indeed left the country, prompting Swedish authorities to seek assistance from their German counterparts to track her down. By March 20th, a warrant for Christina's arrest was issued. When she was finally apprehended in Germany, Christina maintained her innocence, claiming there had been a mistake and that she had no connection to the horrific massacre. However, after being extradited to Sweden on March 29th, she requested an immediate meeting with Torney, a request that was swiftly denied. Throughout her time in custody, Christina appeared eerily calm, though she repeatedly asked to speak to or see her ex-boyfriend. The investigation into Christina's actions escalated and her rented apartment was thoroughly searched. Police confiscated her phone, laptop, and all her clothing, carefully inspecting each item for evidence. While no traces of blood were found on her clothes, forensic investigators had by then identified a critical clue from the crime scene: a bloody shoe print. Through a meticulous analysis of the shoe's tread pattern and size, they had identified the brand and model. When presented with this evidence, Christina denied ever owning such shoes. However, this statement was quickly contradicted by her own roommate, who confirmed that Christina had, in fact, worn that exact pair. What investigators found on Christina's laptop, however, was far more incriminating. The device contained a disturbingly large collection of photos of Torney. Some were of the two of them together, while others showed him alone or in the company of Emma. Worse yet, there was a separate folder labeled with a sinister title, filled with pictures of Emma and her children. These photos had been taken from Emma's social media accounts. Each picture had been captioned with vile, threatening, and chilling messages written by Christina, painting a portrait of a woman consumed by jealousy and hatred. Even more damning was the recovered search history on Christina's laptop. She had been researching methods to commit murder without leaving evidence, ways to clean up a crime scene, and techniques to mislead investigators. Alongside these searches, investigators found detailed notes that included a layout of Emma and Torney's new home, the times Torney typically left for work when he returned, and a log of the family's daily routines. Christina had been obsessively tracking their every move. As investigators pieced together the overwhelming evidence, a glimmer of hope appeared on the medical front. By the end of March, Emma's condition began to stabilize, her vital signs improved, and doctors made the cautious decision to bring her out of the medically induced coma. Upon awakening, Emma was still unable to speak due to the breathing tube, but her eyes showed recognition. She was aware of the relatives standing by her bedside, yet she couldn't grasp how she had ended up in the hospital. Her confusion was palpable, and as she gradually regained her senses, the full weight of the tragedy would soon begin to unravel. Though she could not yet speak, her mere survival became critical. She was the only living witness to the brutal attack that had taken the lives of her children. Investigators hoped that as Emma regained her strength, she might recall key details that could definitively link Christina to the crime and bring her to justice. The truth, though painful, was beginning to surface. As soon as Emma grew strong enough to speak clearly, the police initiated their conversation with her. However, they chose not to immediately disclose the devastating truth about her children. To their surprise, Emma had no recollection of the brutal events that had unfolded on that fateful day. Instead, she believed she had been in a car accident. Emma repeatedly asked about her children, desperately inquiring if they were all right. At first, both her family and the medical staff responded vaguely, attempting to shield her from the harsh reality. But after much deliberation, they decided it was cruel to keep her in the dark any longer. When Emma was finally told the truth, that her beloved children were no longer alive, she broke down, completely hysterical. The shock was so overwhelming that the doctors had to sedate her. Afterward, each time she awoke, Emma would ask again about Max and Saga, and the cycle of anguish repeated itself. Her mind, it seemed, couldn't or wouldn't accept the loss, erasing the traumatic information soon after it was delivered. Weeks passed like this, with Emma learning about the deaths of her children only to forget again. Finally, a month later, it was decided that Emma would be taken to the house where the tragedy occurred, accompanied by medical professionals. As soon as she stepped inside, a flood of memories rushed back to her. She vividly recalled how she had been setting the table while her children played nearby. She was texting her sister when there was a knock on the door. Opening it, she had seen a small, dark figure standing there, a woman. When Emma asked what she wanted, a sharp pain suddenly overtook her, and everything went black. The figure, now unmistakably Christina, had forced her way into the house. Emma, desperate to protect her children, had attempted to chase her, but she collapsed in the hallway, where Christina mercilessly attacked her, attempting to finish her off. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Christina Schurer maintained her innocence, stubbornly denying any involvement in the crime. The murder weapon, a hammer, was never recovered, and this gave her legal team hope that she could escape justice. However, a crucial piece of evidence surfaced when Christina's roommate mentioned that, around the time of the murders, a hammer had gone missing from her toolkit. The hammer matched the general size and shape of the weapon used in the attack. Though this was also considered circumstantial, it further strengthened the case against Christina. More surveillance footage added to the mounting evidence. Detectives uncovered video from a suburban bus station showing Christina traveling to Aruga 3 times in the week, leading up to the murders. She couldn't explain why she had visited so frequently, but the detectives suspected she had been stalking Emma and her children, carefully planning her attack. Christina also failed to explain why she had conducted numerous internet searches on how to commit a murder without leaving evidence, or why she had collected photographs of Emma and her children. All signs pointed to a meticulously premeditated crime, driven by a dangerous obsession. The trial began on July 29, 2008. Christina was charged with the double murder of Max and Saga, as well as the attempted murder of Emma, all carried out with particular cruelty. From the moment she entered the courtroom, her behavior was bizarre and unsettling. Christina smiled broadly and waved to those present as though greeting old friends. When shown gruesome images of the crime scene, the mutilated bodies of Max and Saga, she suddenly burst into laughter, a reaction that shocked everyone in the courtroom. At first, her strange behavior led many to question her sanity. However, a court-appointed psychiatric evaluation determined that Christina was in fact sane and fully aware of her actions. She had enjoyed the brutality of what she had done and made no attempt to hide it. When Emma was brought into the courtroom and saw Christina for the first time since the attack, she fainted. Upon regaining consciousness, Emma confirmed that she now fully remembered the events, stating that Christina's face was the last thing she saw before everything went black. Despite the best efforts of Christina's defense lawyer to argue her innocence, the jury was unanimous in their verdict. Christina Schurer was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In addition to her sentence, she was ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma for the unimaginable suffering she had caused. Further investigations found no evidence to support Christina's claim that she had ever been pregnant or that she had given birth to a son by Torny. The child had been just another one of her manipulations. As for Emma, her recovery was slow and painful both physically and emotionally. But through it all, Torny remained by her side, supporting her through every step of her journey. In the summer of 2010, they finally got married, moving forward from the dark past that had almost destroyed them. Today they are raising 2 children together, teaching them about the tragic loss of their older brother and sister Max and Saga, in a way that honors their memory. Thank you for watching, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Many more shocking stories await.